In this video, I have something very special for you. We're going to dive into an official FBI declassified document, available on their online database called The Vault. This document, dated June 14, 1957, takes us to a fascinating time, a time when the mystery of UFOs captivated the world's attention. He refers to figures of the ufology of the 1950s, including George Van Tassel, Dan Fry, George King, and a certain Margaret Storm. He talks about conferences, interplanetary communications, and even Nikola Tesla, one of the most influential inventors in the history of technology. The content of this document is astonishing, intriguing, and takes us in a direction that you may never have imagined. Let me read it to you. Dear friends, we have not published a newsletter since the 1st of May 1956 because we did not have any space news that we could consider authentic. However, we now have good news to share about the conference of George Van Tassel and Dan Fry in the ballroom of Hotel Diplomat. George Van Tassel operates the Giant Rock Spaceport in California and has hosted 4 annual spacecraft conventions at the airport. He is the author of 2 books, I Rode a Flying Saucer, and In This World and Out Again. He is also the editor of the magazine, Procedures, which is usually published every month. Previous issues have been reprinted in a single volume. Dan Fry is the author of The White Sands Incident. In this book, he tells the story of a journey he made in a flying saucer from a desert spot on the White Sands test ground in New Mexico to New York City in 32 minutes. Dan Fry and another gentleman are now driving to New York. George Van Tassel and Art Oho will arrive on Mr. Oho's plane. They all plan to visit the Diplomat Hotel in New York on June 17. They will probably be heard next week on Long John's radio show WOR, from midnight to 5:30 in the morning every night except Sunday. This letter will not reach you in time to see flying saucers over New York on the night of June 13 from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. But there will again be large-scale flying saucer operations on all American areas on July 1st. It will take place in 3 phases as follows: from New York on July 1st at 9 a.m. to the Washington, D.C. area, at 9:25 a.m. in North America, in Central America after 9:25 a.m., in the South American areas from 9:30 a.m. to 9:35 a.m. For the second phase, the same areas as above, from 12 noon on the 1st of July. For the third phase, large-scale operations in all U.S. areas from 7 p.m. on the 1st of July. The above information was provided by George King, editor of Cosmic Voice. Please also note that George King has also published the background numbers of Cosmic Voice in 1 volume for a price of $1 plus shipping costs. This is undoubtedly the best buy of saucer messages we knew. George King is considered the best telepathic contact people have in space, although George Van Tassel's is the best we have in America. Margaret Storm has been assigned to some work with space people, as follows. She writes a book, The Return of the Dove, a story of the life of Nikola Tesla, the scientist, and the role of his inventions in the new age. Much of the data in this book was provided to Storm through transcripts received on the Tesla set, a radio machine-type device invented by Tesla in 1938 for interplanetary communication. Tesla died in 1943 and its engineers only built the Tesla set after his death. It was commissioned in 1950 and since then, Tesla engineers have been in close contact with spaceships. Space people visited Tesla's engineers many times and told us that Tesla was a Venusian, brought to this planet as a baby in 1856, and was then handed over to Mr. and Mrs. Tesla in a remote mountainous province in what is now Yugoslavia. Now that we have introduced our subject, let us delve together into the historical context of this document. It was the mid-1950s, a time of the Cold War, of the space race, but also a time of growing fascination for UFOs. It is in this context that our document takes place. The document mentions several key figures of the ufology of that era. Let's start with George Van Tassel. Van Tassel was a controversial character, famous for organizing annual UFO rallies in Giant Rock in California's Mojave Desert. He is also the author of 2 books, I Straddled a Flying Saucer, and In This World and Out Again. in which he shares his claims of contact with aliens. Dan Fry, another name mentioned in the document, was also an important figure in ufology in the 1950s. He is best known for his book, The White Sands Incident, where he recounts a journey aboard a flying saucer that would have taken him from White Sands, New Mexico, to New York, in and out in just 32 minutes. The paper also quotes George King, editor of Cosmic Voice, another influential figure in the UFO community, who is known for his alleged telepathic contacts with extraterrestrial entities. Finally, the document mentions a certain Margaret Storm, who was writing a book about the life of Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor and engineer. According to the document, she was receiving information for her book through a device called the Tesla set, which was allegedly designed by Tesla himself for interplanetary communication. So much for the historical context. These figures of ufology have helped to shape a fascinating period of history, mixed with myths and speculations about our place in the universe. Having understood the historical context of our declassified document, it is time to analyze its contents more precisely. The document talks about conferences, interplanetary communications, and even contains some surprising statements about Nikola Tesla. Let's start with the conference mentioned in the document. George Van Tassel and Dan had planned to speak at the Diplomat Hotel in New York. It was a time when UFO conferences were quite popular, providing a platform for those who claimed to have direct experiences with beings from elsewhere. Next, the paper talks about large-scale flying saucer operations in all U.S. areas. It provides specific details on the timing and location of these so-called UFO sightings, even though today we have no historical or scientific evidence to support these claims. Perhaps the most surprising part of the document concerns Nikola Tesla. The paper suggests that Tesla, the legendary inventor whose work revolutionized the world of electricity, was actually an alien from Venus. In addition, the paper claims that Tesla has designed a device, called the Tesla set, for interplanetary communication. What does all this mean? What can we learn from this piece of history, this piece of mystery that we've uncovered? The large-scale flying saucer operations described in the document seem to have been planned with remarkable precision. The schedules, the geographical areas, everything was detailed with incredible care. Why so many details if it was just an invention? The precision and seriousness of these statements can only make us wonder. And if it wasn't real, why did the FBI get so interested in this information that it kept and classified it? The mere fact that these documents were kept by such a large federal agency is cause for reflection. Then we have the claim on Nikola Tesla that he is an alien from the planet Venus. This is an extraordinary idea, and at first glance it may seem completely far-fetched. However, let us not forget who Tesla was. A man so far ahead of his time, an inventor whose work was so revolutionary and ahead of their time that it still seems almost miraculous today. Tesla was a visionary, a man who dreamed of things that no one else could conceive in his time. Can we really be sure that his mind, which might be called a genius, was due only to the intelligence of a human mind? Or was Tesla really something more, as this paper suggests? Tesla was an incredibly intelligent and visionary man, who devised inventions that enabled a quantum leap in technological change. One of Tesla's most notable contributions to science and technology is the development of alternating current, AC, which is now a standard for distributing electricity around the world. Before the adoption of alternating current, the direct current, DC, developed by Thomas Edison was used, but it had limitations, particularly in terms of transmission distance. Another great invention is the Tesla coil. This invention is a kind of resonant transformer used to produce very high voltages, low current currents and high alternating current frequencies. It's because of Tesla's reel that we now have technologies like radio and television. Tesla also laid the groundwork for wireless communication and radio. In fact, although the invention of radio is often attributed to Guglielmo Marconi, Marconi actually used Tesla's patents to develop his own radio system. In 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized that Tesla was the inventor of radio. Tesla also created the first remote-controlled device, which he demonstrated by controlling a small boat at an exhibition at Madison Square Garden in 1898. This work laid the groundwork for all remotely piloted devices such as modern drones and unmanned vehicles. Tesla is also said to have invented a revolutionary weapon, much like in the Star Wars saga. Although this invention is more speculative and controversial, Tesla claimed to have developed a defensive weapon, often called a death ray, capable of sending concentrated beams of energy over great distances. Consider for a minute Tesla's stature, seriousness, and undeniable contribution to science and technological advancement that have positioned him as one of the brightest minds of his time. Tesla was a true visionary, a world-leading innovator whose inventions changed the world as we know it. Alternating current, radio, Tesla coil, and even the beginnings of the remote control are just a few examples of Tesla's prodigious innovations. For these reasons, he is often considered the greatest scientist of his time. So, given that this man had devoted his entire life to the service of science and progress, is it really unthinkable that a man of sharp intellect and ingenious mind like Tesla could conceive of an invention as avant-garde as the ray of death? The question may not be whether Tesla lied about his invention, but rather how much of Tesla's genius and ability to engineer technologies so advanced that we still struggle to understand them today. What is evident in this story is that even though Tesla had not developed such a technology, he had the idea in his head. The idea of lasers was first theorized by Albert Einstein in 1917, but it was not until 1960 that the first functional laser was built by Theodore Maiman. Initially, lasers were used mainly for research purposes, but their potential as a weapon was soon recognized. The problem is that the technology was not advanced enough at the time to allow practical military application. It was in the 1970s and 1980s that research on directed energy weapons began to intensify. The Reagan administration's Star Wars project in the 1980s represented a massive investment in directed energy weapons research, particularly for high-energy lasers. Many of these technologies were still at a very experimental stage at the time. It is only in recent decades that technological advances have enabled the development of more practical directed energy weapons. Today, many militaries around the world, including the US military, have high-energy lasers and other forms of directed energy weapons. However, these technologies are still in development and their use on the battlefield remains limited. So there are weapons that can be compared to Tesla's death ray. Tesla died in 1943, and he had begun to develop the idea of his death ray, or as he himself called it, his teleforce, in the 1930s. Tesla described this invention as a kind of particle beam or electron beam weapon, which theoretically would be able to send concentrated beams of energy over large distances. He argued passionately that this technology could be used for defense purposes by destroying any aircraft or other threats hundreds of kilometers away. These weapons are capable of accurately targeting and destroying targets, often by heating them to melt or burn. High-energy lasers are currently used by the military to intercept threats such as drones or missiles. There are also microwave weapons, which emit high-frequency waves capable of disrupting electronics. These weapons are often used to neutralize enemy electronic equipment. The idea of such a weapon in Tesla's day seems like something out of a science fiction novel, but Tesla was very serious about its claims. He even claimed to have built a working prototype of the weapon in the 1930s. Given that Tesla has never been able to present any hard evidence to back up its claims, its death ray remains a subject of questioning and conjecture. This raises the question of why Tesla would have claimed to have designed such an invention at the experimental stage without being able to prove it. There are several scenarios that could explain this. Perhaps Tesla did have a prototype, but it was not sufficiently advanced to be convincingly demonstrated. It is also possible that he encountered unforeseen problems in the development or implementation of his prototype, technical obstacles that he did not anticipate. Another possibility is that Tesla had actually made its prototype, but by becoming aware of the destructive potential of such a weapon and the dramatic consequences of misuse, he could have decided to destroy the prototype and erase all the evidence of its invention. We reviewed a declassified FBI document, discussed contact meetings with aliens, discussed flying saucer predictions, and even explored the possibility that Nikola Tesla himself was of alien origin. These mysteries, these questions without definitive answers, all labyrinths in the mind, paths that lead us to unknown truths. What if, in the end, this is the true beauty of the unknown? Unceasing exploration, constant wonder at the mysteries around us, insatiable appetite for truths still hidden in the shadows of history. Is not every declassified document, every controversial statement, every theory without evidence an invitation to deepen our research, to open the doors of our perception of the world a little more? Every mystery is an enigma, every enigma is a story, and every story is an invitation to wonder, to question, to seek and to discover. As an explorer of mystery, we accept these invitations with an open mind and a heart ready to explore.